Welcome to the program. My name is Marty Schenkman. I'm joined by a friend and colleague, Amanda Copeland.
Copeland.
After all these years, I'll get it right. This is, I think, a very, very important, unusual, and hopefully powerful program due to Amanda, not me. And it's going to be followed. We have a second program, which I'm going to let Amanda, when she introduces, tell you about the second program, which is really, you don't want to miss it. I found it incredibly moving and powerful, and saw one of the bravest people I've ever met is the featured speaker of it. And Amanda will tell you about that. We're going to deal with a topic that, again, I can't stress the importance of it. And I think is something that for many will be uncomfortable, but hopefully that discomfort will lead to positive action that helps many, many others. And the topic is really the mental health concerns that all professionals, including doctors, even though we're not focused on them, but lawyers, CPAs, financial advisors, all face. And it's no secret we work in whatever the allied professions you're in, we work in very stressful professions. The demands of our professions, the demand for billable hours, the demand for generating AUM or new clients in whatever profession we're in, the incredible technical complexity of what we all handle, it's stressful. And we're going to talk about some of the impact of that. Amanda, I think to get started, it would be helpful for you first to just tell people who you are so they know why you're so smart. And then to introduce not only this program, but I think the follow-up program, which is important.
Yeah, so I'm a licensed professional counselor, which means I have a master's degree in mental health. I'm also a certified hostage negotiator, which is pretty badass. And the core of my business is we go into different people's homes and we work with them and their families when they're struggling with mental health disorders. So a big part of that is many of the families we work with have estate planners, have financial advisors, family offices. And so I've become very, very adept at working with that population as well. And in that journey, what I've realized is the extreme amount of mental health concerns happening with those advisors. And as I've become friends with them, I've started speaking more on this topic because what I realize is in a culture that's like a Superman culture, it's really hard to show vulnerability. And my hope is that in bringing awareness to these issues, that at some point, if a friend of mine is struggling and somebody around them notices, there will be an opportunity to intervene because someone knows what to look for and they have the languaging to stand up and intervene to help that person get help. So I love that you do pretty much everything with me, but I love that you're equally passionate about this as well. And I remember the first time we talked about it, you said to me, I tried to throw in some pictures and I was like, we can't separate the people from the numbers and we got to show pictures, and behind every single number, there's a face, there's a family, there's a future that's forever altered. And you're like, we don't have consent for that. And in my head, I was like, lawyers. So, so I got bold and I reached out to a lawyer named Tabitha, who was actually a lawyer, a partner at the firm of this man, Ken Jamison, who ended up dying by suicide. And I asked her to connect me to Betsy, who's Ken's wife. And
Let me interject. A big part of the issues were the mental health issues and the stress that the job caused this attorney. And it's a but for the grace of God, there go I. It could be anyone we know or any of us that because of the stress of professional matters coupled with personal issues could push many and has pushed too many people to a very dark place. So this is something that's a really vital message, whether it's for you personally, the person down the hall, or in the future. It's really important. I'm sorry, I just wanted to make sure they connected.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, at the end of the day, we're all one of three people. We're either Tabitha, Betsy, or Ken. And so what I really want
You'll
people to
understand what
remember.
that means as we go on, and especially if you watch the second program, but it's very, very powerful thought.
Yep. And so I know that this presentation will not only change lives, but potentially save lives because of the numbers that are associated with CPAs, accountants, financial professionals, and lawyers who are struggling with mental health disorders.
And that's not an exaggeration. What Amanda said, she means. And if people will take to heart the lessons of what she's going to teach all of us, including me on this program, and especially if you listen to the next program, lives will be saved. It's nothing short of that. So that's not an exaggeration at all. Amanda, I'm going to let you lead the way, and I'll just comment periodically. And if I don't advance the slides at the right cadence, you let me know.
I will. Um, I think that mental health is a topic that impacts each one of us. I was at a conference recently where I spoke and did a presentation similar to this with lawyers and financial professionals. And I said, raise your hand if you or someone you know has been impacted by a mental health disorder. And every single person in that room raised their hand. So, and I had people coming up to me telling me, a friend of mine who's an advisor just tried to commit suicide recently. A friend of mine who's an advisor has been really struggling with depression and I don't know what to do. And so, when you know someone or are someone who's struggling with a mental health disorder, especially when it's not in the past and it's presently happening, it could be really triggering. So we have resources at the end. You can always reach out to me. I know many of you end up reaching out to Marty, but he'll forward it to me
I'm not the guy.
if you need help or just someone to point you in the right direction.
You should. The conference, by the way, was the Nevada Trust Conference,
Yeah.
and it had all the allied professionals, and it was really kudos to them for including Amanda and letting her address this topic. It's not your typical GST tax planning topic, but nonetheless important. So why is this important, Amanda? I think you've kind of already said, but I think it's worth going into a little more detail.
Yeah, so let's rewind back into the pandemic stats. 2023, they're surveying 3,000 lawyers, questioning them about topics related to well-being and the relation to the law firm's culture and policies. You see pandemic stress is one of those, but I think even outside of pandemic stress, economic uncertainty is always ever present, and so are the pressure for billable hours. Um, the other thing you'll look down as we go is some of the things where type A personalities thrive on achievement, they thrive on being connected to a greater purpose, and you'll see how in our stats, people are forever getting more and more disconnected from the things that drive them to well-being. So 50% are saying they're increasingly cynical and they feel a decreased sense of accomplishment. 60% feel overwhelmed and exhausted, and more than 75% are saying their work environment, specifically noted their work environment, contributed to their mental health issues. And the top reasons: billable hours, 24/7 pace of work, and client demands. You'll see later in our slides, we talk about some of the things for type A people is the ability to set boundaries and priorities. With the 24/7 pace of work and client demands and pressure for billable hours, these things are undermined consistently, and there's no end in sight for what that looks like.
And whether you're getting pressured in a wealth management firm to bring in AUM, whether you're in an accounting firm getting pressured for either billable hours or if you bill by the return, whatever it is, all the allied professions really experience considerable stress. And the statistics, and we'll talk about a few, they're bad. They're bad. The legal profession is one of the most stressful of all professions of any type of work environment. And that's something that we all need to be aware of and cognizant of. So tell us a little about lawyers. And by the way, listen to what Amanda's going to explain, because when she tells you the way statistical data on this is gathered, and when you change the questions that are asked, how different the data is. It's really enlightening. This is really, I think you'll find surprising. Amanda?
So you and I had dug deeper in the past on this topic, and I knew some of the data because of that. And when I looked at the chart that says what lawyers self-report, I thought to myself, these numbers are incredibly low. I'm not sure what's going on. And then I looked at the challenges in 2024. All of that looked like, yeah, those are reasonable. And I see the numbers are so much higher just on the challenges noted. And I asked myself, are they afraid to report? Are they just in denial? What's going on? And then the next, if you go to the next slide, the first thing I noticed as a counselor is that each and every one of those questions are screener questions for depression and anxiety. And so what I realized is that when you're asking people to self-report, they are comparing against what they know. So if your idea of depression is the person who's unable to function, not getting out of bed, not showering, not going to work, and you are able to function and you're able to mask and perform well, then you think to yourself, oh, I must not be depressed. I could still get out of bed.
And bill hours.
And bill hours. And so what I realized in looking at this, you could see the numbers start going up 50, 60, 70%, and it's wildly different from the numbers self-reported. And so if you go to the next slide, what they found is the same thing with substance abuse. So when you ask more specifically, it goes from 21% initially identifying as problem drinkers to over 36% acknowledging struggling with substance abuse once you state specific criteria. So you have to move from a place where you leave the defining to someone's imagination or stereotypes, and you start asking specific questions so that you truly can identify, is there a real problem here, or are we okay?
When you go to a conference and you just, without being rude or invasive or anything, just pay attention to the people you're sitting with and how much they're drinking. Not all of them, but some of them, it's going to be cause to pause and think about, do they have an issue? We've all been at programs where, you know, they have a cocktail hour, and some of our best friends, colleagues, are on their fourth or fifth drink, and we're still finishing up drink one. It's a problem. But it's fascinating how, what Amanda said, because of the culture of the different allied professions, if you're asked, are you depressed or have a drinking problem, some admit to it because it's obviously confidential studies, but they're comparing themselves to the rest of the profession, which is also struggling and working so hard. So they feel quite fine because they fit in. That's a problem as to what the culture is, because when you ask the questions phrased differently, as Amanda showed, the numbers jump dramatically. That's really cause for worry. So you may feel fine because, you know, everyone else had 5 drinks and I only had 4. But is that really appropriate? Is that really healthy for you? How are you really doing?
I think the other thing that I told you before we started this is part of my experience at that conference was the amount of people who came up to me afterwards who were advisors saying, I never knew that these were red flags that would lead me to a bad place. I just thought these are things we all had to tolerate until the end of our careers. And they told me that they were going to go home and make changes immediately because they didn't want to meet the same fate. And I was so, so grateful that they were in attendance to that presentation. And I wondered about the other people who weren't in attendance, who still think this is something we just have to deal with for the rest of our careers.
Amanda, can you give an example or two, obviously without any identification, of some of the things if they did indicate something? But just to highlight the importance of what Amanda said, these, and you know, you're dealing with an incredibly bright group of people in all the allied professions. You wouldn't make it through all the professional designations and entry exams if you weren't at some level of intelligence. But until they heard the contrast, they didn't know. That's really important. Can you give a couple of examples? Did they say anything specific that, you could share to give more context to the listeners?
Some people talked about just a baseline of feeling overwhelmed and anxious. Some people talked about feeling like there's a never-ending cycle of the amount of billable hours that they have to keep out doing. Some people talked about feeling like they are lonely and isolated because they're not able to really spend time with their family and their lives are going on without them. And they feel like in their family, their role is to provide just a paycheck. And they feel like at work, they can't be themselves because they have no one to tell how much they're actually struggling. So they continue to be more and more lonely and isolated, but thought that's just how it has to be until I can retire. There were a lot of different things that just, it was really sad to hear. And I really do hope that they go home and they make these changes. But ultimately, I know that the issue that they're encountering is how do I choose between myself and my career? And does choosing one mean giving up the other?
Which it shouldn't have to. Shouldn't have to. And by the way, we're not going to get into it today. It's another topic, another discussion. But retire. I was speaking with a colleague and close friend this past week. She's in her mid 80s, still working full time. Is that a good thing? I mean, incredibly bright, loves what she does, but is that a good thing? Is there a better balance at some age that should be achieved? What is it in the culture of the firms, our profession, that has someone working at that level to that age?
I think the other really important thing is I think, at least at the beginning of my career, and I think it's the truth for a lot of younger professionals or people starting out at a new firm, you think to yourself, oh, okay, if I just put in the time now, then it'll be less stressful later. And you can see from the stresses increasing over time section, that's not true. They're actually getting more stressed than they were at the time they thought, all I need to do is put in the work now.
I don't know if you even remember Mad Magazine, Alfred E. Newman, What, Me Worry? I don't know if
I've heard of it. I've heard of it.
And financial advisors, how is the situation any different for them versus the lawyers that we just discussed? Doesn't seem
I
so.
think it looks to me from all the data that they're in the same boat. And I think that some of the studies took some time to flesh out, is this a matter of like the market going up and down and how does this compare to regular just investors, right? I have an E-Trade account that I do. Is my stress as someone who manages my own money to a certain extent, is that different than financial advisors? And they said yes. So taking out the investing element and the stress of like watching the thing go up and down and all of that, taking away that specific element, advisors are more stressed than just people who operate in investing their money.
And look at the statistics over time. It's just what you found with lawyers, the same thing. Look at the numbers at 44%. And Amanda, what about the last line on this slide?
The thing I love about psych studies is that so many of them come to the most obvious conclusions. Like, we didn't need a whole study to realize that stress reduction positively impacts both business and personal life. But I think that for business owners, firm owners, people who are managing other people, there is a direct ROI, like financially and in terms of productivity and well-being, where if you lower stress, you'll actually impact both your business and personal life in a positive way. What I realized with the financial advisors who are more the independent RIA financial advisors, their struggles mirror more the entrepreneurs. And yes, they have all the struggles that financial advisors and financial professionals have in general. And they're also worried about business profitability, growth trajectory, work-life balance in the same way any entrepreneur would be. So across the board, you can imagine the fee compression, shrinking margins, increasing competition, the AI coming on board, the regulatory changes. I don't know, as not a financial professional, but you might know more in that arena. They're saying that regulatory changes are the most stressful, and they happen so regularly that they're taking a lot of time to stay on top of those, and that's a major stressor. How often are those changing?
And think about, for example, estate tax planning, which is an area that many of the people on this program specialize in. I mean, every new administration is potentially a radical change, not a minor change, a radical change. Everything we do is so technical. Every week there's a new case or ruling or something that could change materially what we do. I mean, that is very difficult and stressful to keep up with.
Yeah. The
And
other
AI,
thing
just
that,
to amplify, I'm sorry, what you said about, this is not just for financial advisors, but think of what AI is going to do to all the knowledge, if you will, knowledge professionals, financial, law, accounting. So much of what we do will be potentially taken over or eliminated by AI. And right now, I feel like one of the bigger stressors that's going to continue to get worse, all the allied professions and medical as well, because I hear this from doctors I talk to all the time. Clients, customers, patients come into the office, kind of they know the answer already because they looked online. AI is only going to exacerbate that. They don't need to talk to me because they know everything. So
yes.
it's not even as if they come to you with the respect that we deserve for decades of experience and all the time we've invested to gain the knowledge, but they Googled it, they put it into Copilot, they know.
Oh my gosh, the amount of people who come to me saying, okay, I was on TikTok and the criteria, someone was talking about OCD, and I think I have it. I'm like, oh my gosh, you are now diagnosing yourself through social media and TikToks?
I'm glad it happens to you as much as to us. And it's
Yes.
only going to get worse.
Yes, I agree with that. Here are some additional stressors unique to the financial advisors. You can just see global economic shifts. I mean, you see with the tariff war right now, how all of that's impacting the market and different things. So I think the other thing that I've heard is how the financial cycle has to mirror the life cycle. So there are events like divorce, death, career changes, where the person who's in charge of the money, the financial professional, is saying, is the market at a point where we could support this person's change and still have enough money for their retirement? So there's also the psychological roller coaster of managing client reactions while still managing your own.
CPAs are not immune. Very similar. We didn't give as much statistical data, but there's a survey that was done by the Virginia Society of CPAs that showed really worrisome levels of mental health issues, depression, and anxiety. And we didn't belabor it because I think it's going to sound the same as what we just talked about for lawyers and wealth advisors, financial planners. But we wanted to have something specific on it just so you would know that CPAs are certainly not immune. The pressure of tax season can be an incredible toll. And I hear constantly from CPAs it's very hard to get qualified staff. And part of the reason may very well be what you see on this slide. It's just the challenges, the difficulties that the lifestyle, especially during tax season, causes people. And while we're going to go through a case study on an attorney, Ken, there's a cite here to an article where very brave, and kudos to him, CPA came forward and wrote an article in the Journal of Accountancy, which is really, the preeminent journal for the profession, talking about his struggles. And we need more people to be vocal about what they have struggled with, because it changes the perception. So others will think, okay, it's not wrong to have these feelings or these challenges. So kudos to Mark for speaking out. And again, more people should, because it will help. So Amanda, I guess this is like changing gears a little and trying to bring it home and more real than just the statistics, which are deeply worrying themselves?
Yeah, so, I'm really, really big on bringing stories to the forefront because what I want is for people to see not only this could be me, but this could be my friend, this could be my child, this could be my spouse. And so I've actually chosen to highlight two younger financial professionals because, with some of the lawyers, we highlight the older ones, but this is not something that's just age dependent. And what I learned about the financial professionals is the amount of sheer grit that they put in because that's the only differentiator for them. There's no creativity in numbers. And so they feel like if they can't work harder than anyone else, then they're going to be pushed out of that position. So you can see that it's literally pushing them to their death. And so Thomas, he's 29, and he ends up jumping from the 24th floor of his Manhattan building. And his father talks about their conversations around stress and pressure he was under at work and how he might have been using drugs and alcohol to cope, which is not unusual, especially when you're pushing hours. You need uppers like cocaine, Adderall, different things to help you get up, but you also need something to help you come down. Alcohol, heroin, pain pills, benzos like Xanax. And so you're on this drug-fueled roller coaster, which also messes with your emotions, and so does sleep deprivation. So it becomes at a point untenable, and everybody reaches a breaking point, and your impulse control is also lowered, and so is your judgment and executive functioning. So imagine being at that point. It's a lot harder to say, I'm going to sleep on it before I make a decision if you're never able to sleep on it. There's another young man, he's 22. I read his story and he actually tried to quit one time. And it was his dad that said, don't do that. Put in a year and see if you can make it through in a year. And he just couldn't. And so he ends up going back and continuing in the job that he had once quit a week earlier. And he ends up dying by suicide. I also wanted to highlight a story of a lawyer who made it through, just like you wanted to highlight the CPA who made it through. I think that these are the people that give us hope that everybody's struggling with this level of anxiety and depression. Although there are severe consequences that lead them to say, I can't do this anymore. Not everybody is ending their lives because they're in a position where they can't choose between their lives and career. But this guy, Steve Angel, he actually has a blog. Lawyers with Depression is what it's called. And so he talks about how his struggle just led him to be able to not function at all. And it actually led to the Oklahoma State Bar stepping in for him failing to represent several of his clients. And ultimately, he ends up surviving, and he's now an advocate and a voice for other attorneys.
Amanda, you should also mention when you introduce the story of Ken, the video we're going to have at the end of this and the second follow-up webinar.
Yeah. So I found when we first did a presentation on advisor mental health, there was an article that I found on CNN called Why Are Lawyers Killing Themselves? And they actually showed.
I got to interrupt you. There was an article on CNN about lawyers dying by suicide because of the stress and the problems that aren't being addressed. Just pause and think about that for a minute. This made major media because it's so, I don't know if prevalent's the right word, worrisome. That's powerful.
Yeah.
That's impactful.
Yeah. And what I learned from that article was that lawyers in Kentucky are actually dying by suicide at higher rates than any other state in the nation. And Ken was, if you know anything about like Ohio and Kentucky, Cincinnati is literally right on the border. You fly into the Cincinnati airport, which is right there at the edge of Kentucky, and you go right over the border to Ohio. But Ken lived in Cincinnati, Ohio, and right by Kentucky. And he was licensed in both states, as many of them seem to be in that city specifically. And when I looked at his picture, his eyes grabbed me. And I thought to myself, this guy is literally anybody you might know. He doesn't look like this very prestigious lawyer where I can say, oh, only prestigious lawyers this is what's happening to them. He didn't have a needle in his arm. He wasn't, you know,
He looks like a
doing,
nice guy, and like a million other lawyers or colleagues or professionals that we all know.
yeah. And so there was something about him that grabbed me and I wanted to know more. So I looked up his name and I started just going down this rabbit hole of finding things about him and his life. And I came across a blog written by this lawyer named Tabitha, who is actually a lawyer at the firm at the same time when Ken was declining and then ended up dying by suicide. And she wrote this blog saying how shocked everyone was by his suicide. But the thing that struck me is throughout the blog, she's listing all of these red flags. And I thought to myself, how are they surprised? But they were
They
surprised
didn't
because
know.
no one knew what to look for. Yep. And
Why don't you say a couple of the flags just at this point, because you just mentioned that?
so Ken talked a lot about being exhausted, even though it was depression he was struggling with, but he talked a lot about being exhausted. Ken Yeah, he was just that guy who asked about everyone else, always caretaking for everyone else, but inside he was really anxious and struggling. He was constantly on this chase for more billable hours, trying to keep up, but he was just such a compassionate man from what I learned that it was really hard being in a more cutthroat firm where it
We're not
wasn't,
making any comments about the firm. It's just a perception that Amanda had. Let me just, since I interrupted already, let me just amplify. The so-called red flags that Amanda's talking about, most of us on this call probably feel exhausted. Most of us have colleagues that feel exhausted. It could be that they're working hard, playing hard, too much pickleball, but it may be a sign, a flag for depression, even severe depression. So if
yeah.
somebody's
I
really exhausted, talk to them.
Yeah, I also want to say, it isn't just a cutthroat firm necessarily, it's a cutthroat culture. And one of the things I heard a lawyer say to me one time is imagine being a doctor and you're surrounded by other people and they're stabbing your patient as you're actively trying to sew them up. And so, as a lawyer, one word off in a document could be the thing that unwinds your client's future. And the pressure of that, you are always having to be attentive to people tearing you down and tearing down the work you're doing. And so, unlike being a doctor, where it's about helping people heal and everyone's on board for that, no one's trying to sabotage the healing or the work you're doing. Being a lawyer is living in a constant place of people trying to sabotage the work you're doing because that's what happens.
We can all think of a million circumstances where other colleagues have, whether appropriately, rightfully, wrongfully, judged, criticized, condemned work that we've done, right? The collegial way to do it is to pick up a phone, not an email, and say, hey, Jane, this client came to me. I got to trust that you did. Here's a problem I think there is. Let's see if we can work together and get it resolved to avoid an issue. Does that happen often enough? I don't think so. It's more like, wow, I gotcha.
Yes,
Not the way to do
because
it.
somebody else's mistake is your profitability.
Trust is done wrong. Now I got to redo it. But why do I have to tear down the other professional? Why do I have to risk a client going back and suing the other professional? We all have the ability to reduce, if not eliminate, the negative consequences of that. But is that what we do? If another colleague is doing really well and I can criticize them and derail them, does that help promote my career? It happens way too often. Way too often. we're going to have a video, a short video at the end of this program, near the end of this program, from Tabitha, the partner of Ken. And then the follow-up webinar that we're going to do in a week is going to have an interview with Betsy, Ken's wife. And it's incredibly powerful. And I think putting faces and real stories on the terrible statistics that Amanda started us with makes this so real that hopefully more of us will take heed. You want to make some comments on this slide, Amanda?
Yeah, one of the things that really struck me was how much Ken tried. He really, really tried. I mean, he went to a psychologist, he went to a psychiatrist. Um, he would just frantically look at anything that would help lower stress and really try. I mean, they say walk, he's walking 5 miles a day. They say, do Pilates classes, he's out there doing Pilates classes. He was so desperate to get better and tried so hard, but between the pressure of the work environment and the fragility of where his mental health was, there was no way that he could have outstress managed the stress that was coming in from his work environment.
This slide I find terrifying. He was successful by every measure. Seems like an incredibly nice guy. Had a very supportive, loving family. Had a religious life and involvement. Got professional help. I don't think there's many people that are struggling that have the support and resources that Ken availed himself of. And if it wasn't enough for him, what about all the people that may not have a supportive family, that may have gone through a horrible divorce because of the stress and pressures of work, not uncommon, or who don't have a religious affiliation, a church or whatever that they go to, and they lose that grounding that provides. What about the people that are embarrassed, which is wrong, but many people are embarrassed to go see a mental health professional. I don't have a problem. I'm tough. I'm going to tough my way through it. Ken, and this is again shocking, terrifying to me. How many people are struggling that don't have the backstop and resources, and even here those weren't enough? What about the others?
Yeah, the other thing that I got from Betsy was, and from Tabitha's blog, we talk about the type A personality as the fixer, and Tabitha wrote it so succinctly. She said, she said Ken was such a fixer that when he saw himself as a problem, the only solution he could see was to remove himself from the equation. And in our interview with Betsy, she said that Ken always felt like such a burden on the family. And she talked about how he never gave them the opportunity to see him through this struggle where he didn't have to be the one to fix it, or he didn't have to make things better. And she talked about how he did not just end his own life and dreams. He ended the life and dreams of his wife and his children at that time as well, and they had to rebuild. And I want everybody out there who thinks that they're the burden, who thinks that taking themselves out of the equation is better, to really watch Betsy's webinar with us and to hear that your family loves you, your family is supporting you, and your family wants to see you do this, and you do not have to be the one to fix it.
Let me make a comment, and perhaps you can comment as well. I don't know that many people, if any, go into the allied professions without a fixer mentality, right? Somebody comes to me, whether I was wearing my MBA, CPA, or law hat, I got to fix their problem. They're spending too much money, their financial future's not going to work out. They have an issue with their children or other heirs, and if we could only work on it, we can come up with a way to avoid the conflict we know would otherwise be inevitable. We fix things. That's what we do. We all get great satisfaction of a client who comes to us probably often unbeknownst to the client, who's like heading for the proverbial abyss, and we can fix it. What does that mindset do, Amanda? How does that play out and exacerbate these issues?
So I think that when you're the fixer and you're the problem, it's exactly what Tabitha said. The only solution is to remove yourself from the equation. But the other big piece of it is your identity is vested in fixing. And so the key to being able to successfully move through different issues like this is identity diversification. And I talk a lot about identity is a lot like the stock market. If you invest it all in your career or all in one person or all in one thing, if it tanks, then you're screwed and you're empty, and people can't live empty. And so the thing I talk about with you is you're a husband, you're a grandpa, you're a father, you're a learner, you're an activist, you're all of these different things. And so although yes, you're also a lawyer, yes, you also have an MBA and CPA and all that kind of, all the A's. Yeah. Your identity and view of yourself is not solely invested in one of those things. So you can move on, even though it would be hard, you would be able to move on because you see other elements of yourself and you've invested in building out other elements of yourself.
Yeah, but I'd rather obsess over anything that's not working out than move on, but that's not for this discussion. So, Amanda, with the statistics, with the personal stories, I guess another way to help people understand some of this is to talk about the character traits of those that go into all the allied professions of finance and law and accounting, both the good and the bad.
Yeah, so you and I have talked about all of these things are traits we have as well, which are awesome. And the big thing with perfectionism is there's a low tolerance for error. And so when you are always trying to be perfect, especially we just talked about with law firms and the documents that you guys are writing up, one word could be your unwinding. So these are the people, the traits of the people you want writing those kinds of documents. These are the traits of the people you want investing your money. And the big problem with the culture is that it starts to undermine the positive elements of these traits, which we'll talk about a little bit down the road.
So a positive character trait is the perfectionism and competitiveness. And those character traits for the professions, all the allied professions, are what makes business work, right? Because you want to do an amazing job. You want to do better than somebody else. You want to get that new client or the new customer. But those things come with a cost.
Yep. So here are the pros, right? They complete tasks, they're goal-oriented, they're overworkers, all great things that you want to hire in an advisor. They also tend to be more direct, great, more resilient, great, self-driven, proactive, all great. And if you keep going, you'll see that it leads to chronic stress, increased risk of burnout, strained social relationships, because when you're ambitious in your career, your time is a pie chart. Your energy is a pie chart. So what else has to give? It's the relationships. They have difficulty delegating because, again, the perfectionism, only I can do it right. I can't risk somebody else messing it up. I don't know about you, Marty, but at the group projects in school, I always had to do the work because I was so worried about my grade riding on other people. They didn't want them messing it up. So I just took it on so that no one messed up my grade. I didn't care about theirs. I just needed mine to be okay.
Let me just interject. I had a thought. One of the challenges in all the allied professions is bringing younger colleagues into the profession and helping them grow and helping them go up the ladder. But it's the very personality traits that make us succeed and successful that make it hard to do that. So unrelated to this discussion, that's something we all need to think about, because if we're not bringing enough young people into the allied professions, what's the future of the professions?
Yeah, And you see with the perfectionism, there's also an excessive self-criticism and constant feelings of inadequacy. And how do you build self-esteem when you're always having that negative self-talk in your head and you always feel that imposter syndrome and inadequacy?
And difficulty with work-life balance. How many of us are in our 70s, late 60s, 80s, older, that haven't begun to slow down, don't have a plan to slow down? There's nothing wrong with pursuing what we love. I love what I do. I hope I can do it for a long time, but I'm making concerted efforts and forcing myself, literally forcing myself, by taking less things on, eliminating memberships, rejecting speaking engagements. You got to be mindful of it, because we're so wired and have spent so many decades doing this that it's almost, to me at least personally, I feel like I have to make a concerted effort, or I'm going to end up in that place I don't want to be.
So you have all of these personality traits. Now they meet a culture where the culture is also ambitious. The culture is also rigid. The culture is also a type A personality. But because it's a culture, it's unrelenting and it doesn't need rest. And so what we've seen for lawyers is
And that's
that,
not necessarily bad, but you got to balance it.
yeah, what we've seen for lawyers is that they come in as one of the healthiest groups in the nation. By the end of year one, they're one of the worst off.
When you say year
And
one, you mean year one in law school or year one working?
yes, in law school,
It starts that early.
starts that early. They end up with higher rates of substance abuse, higher rates of depression, higher rates of anxiety. And I actually had dinner with a couple lawyers talking about all of these kinds of things recently, and they said, oh yeah, because what you realize is that your pursuit of justice is not really what it ends up being. It's trying to make plea bargains if you're a defense attorney or a prosecutor. It's trying to push papers and get things done. And so everything you imagined when you wanted to be a lawyer isn't actually what meets reality when you get to what it is, but it's too late to back out. Do you want to talk about this one a little bit?
I mean, it's, to be a zealous advocate, which is what the ethics rules require us to do, is a tough standard. It's not necessarily conciliatory. When we find ourselves working, and it's no different for me, you work very, very hard, and if a project has a deadline, evenings, weekends, holidays, family vacations, setting a boundary and saying, I'm not going to complete that project because I have a kid's school play to go to. How well is that going to be taken? And how strong do you have to be personally to be able to say, you know what, I'm going to work as best as I can on the project, but I also have to take care of some other things. I'm not going. I don't do any litigation, so I'm not going to really comment on the incivility that sometimes occurs, because I've tried to avoid it through not being involved in litigation. But I don't think we need to belabor that. I think everyone understands it.
Yeah, going back a little bit more, going back one slide, you
One
can
more.
see, yeah, that right there. The inability to set healthy boundaries undermines our resilience. Look, if you go to the very back of or not, don't actually do it. But if you remember when we talked about the pros of the type A personality, its ability to set boundaries, its ability to self-advocate and have accomplishments, being in this culture where the clients define what's an accomplishment, where the clients define what your boundaries are, where their crisis manages your life, it undermines everything that actually makes the type A person successful. And so it ends up lowering resilience, decreasing energy and motivation, increasing burnout, and inflicts emotional and physiological damage. Like we talked about, self-accomplishment comes from productivity, performance, creativity, and helping behavior. But when that's undermined and constantly challenged in the culture, how do you ever end up feeling good about yourself?
It's the first line on this slide is got to be troubling for all of us. And don't feel that CPAs or wealth advisors are out of the soup. It's not laudable that we're one of the top professions for the highest rate of death by suicide, the highest rates of depression and anxiety and substance abuse. I mean, we looked at some of the statistics before. This puts us as legal professionals in a rarefied group that we shouldn't want to be in.
Yeah, I agree. And everything in the cons of the type A personality ends up putting this chronic stress on people, and people can't live in a state of chronic stress.
You know, it's like there's this famous story that gets talked about all the time in psychology about the zebra, right? Zebras have incredible stress when the lion on the savannah is chasing them, and their heart rate better go up, and you could tell this the physical indications of stress better than I can, Amanda. But you know, that zebra has to better have a heck of a lot of stress because they better get away from that lion or it's all over. But when there's no lion around, they're not stressing. But
Yeah.
we, in contrast to that zebra, we carry that stress around way too much. I won't say all the time, but way too much, far too often, not just when the lion's around. You know, stress can be a helpful motivator to keep you motivated to take action, to work hard, to work late when you have something, but not when it's constant.
Well, that's the big problem with anticipatory anxiety, is in your head, the lion's always stalking you and only one step behind, even if you can't see it. The next lawyer is waiting to tear apart your document or your argument. The market may end up in some wild swing and volatility. Your client may have a crisis at the worst possible timing in your life or the market's life. So the lion is always stalking.
You know, it's like when a client is evaluating changing wealth advisors. So they're with wealth advisor A, they go to wealth advisor B for a second opinion. Oh, this is awful. Look at the returns you could have had and you've invested in these funds. They picked terrible funds. Look at the loads in those funds. Anybody can do that. You know, any lawyer can take another lawyer's document and criticize it. And I'm guilty of the same thing, but I try to do it in a way that doesn't create undue angst, and certainly in a way to, at all possible, to minimize any fallout to the other colleague. I mean, unless somebody's being malicious, which I don't see very often at all, you know, anyone can make a mistake, but for the grace of God, there go I. But, you know, there's a difference between trying to improve upon something than saying, oh, this is awful. Look at what happened and it doesn't work. I mean, sometimes we have to say that because it's true, but there is a tendency with wealth management, accounting, right? Oh, look what they did on the tax return. They could have done this, they could have done that, but we can all say that. So it's really, it fosters and exacerbates, maybe is a better word, that stress for all of us.
Well, not just that, my fear mongering the client brings them closer to me because now they're grateful that I saw something the former advisor didn't have, and I profit off of that fear mongering.
So to drive home some of the statistics, Amanda.
Yeah, so think about the stuff that we talked about with Ken. and a lot of these other advisors, there's a high work over commitment, 2.2 times higher odds of suicidal ideation. Lawyers who are lonely. So lonely doesn't just mean you don't have people around you. Lonely is that you cannot be your authentic self in relationship to other people. So Ken, for example, was very good at showering every day, going into work, putting on a smile, and that's really, really energy depleting. And then coming home and just having even more pressure and falling apart and unable to sustain the masking. And male
Can
lawyers
you
2
define
times more
masking
likely.
just to make sure everyone's understanding it? Because it's an important concept.
Yeah, so masking is having to perform or act in a way that's incongruent with where you actually are.
So he's struggling deeply inside, but on the facade looks fine. Just let me belabor another question, because you talked about red flags like exhaustion that colleagues can pick up on and try to help. But if somebody is masking the inner turmoil, for lack of a better term, how do we as colleagues pick up on the red flags to try to help them?
Here's my big question to you. Have you ever met someone where everything all the time is always good?
Not a real person.
Right.
Right.
So people who are performative, like they seem to present this oddly perfect life. That where it's, oh, things are good with the wife, things are good with the kids, things are good at work, and it's like, that's almost too good to be true. Why are they like, that's too good? And you never hear them talk about, oh, I'm struggling with XYZ thing. There's no balance, which is real life. Real life has different levels of, hey, things are up, things are down, but this is how I'm managing the down, or I know that the down phase is going to end. And they have more of an ability to speak realistically about their lives.
So that's something to keep in mind. So Amanda was trying to tell you, she's told you throughout this program a number of the, if you will, flags to look for, symbols, indicia of somebody struggling, so that you can reach out to help. And maybe you add to one of the flags, and maybe it's one of the worst flags or most concerning flags, is something's too perfect, too good to be true, right? Nobody doesn't have problems. We all have issues. So
Yeah.
when you see something that just doesn't feel right, trust your gut. That may be the worst flag or the most important flag.
Yep. This was one of my favorite facts because psychological safety is free. And I hear a lot of different people talk about, well, I don't want to pay for an EAP. My firm doesn't have the profitability for that. I don't want to pay for this well-being thing or these extra things. And everybody thinks about the financial cost. First off, I'll tell you there's a financial cost to something called presenteeism, which is people who are physically present, but they're mentally absent. And so they end up not putting in the level of productivity that they should, or at the level that they should, and they're making more mistakes, and it's costly in that way. But psychological safety is the ability for people to feel safe psychologically, secure in taking risks, acknowledging mistakes or concerns, which again, perfectionism is a trait of type A people. That's a big deal for people to feel safe making mistakes or expressing concerns, and engaging in difficult conversations. And the people that can do that, which is free to provide, those people are nearly 5 times more likely to be confident about their career progression and opportunities. And then for employees who feel supported by their managers, they're 9 times more likely to say that work positively impacts their well-being compared to those who don't feel supported. Think about the stats we saw earlier on. I think it's something like over 50% feel like their work negatively contributes to their mental health and stress, right? Like there's wild amounts of people out there who say that work and their culture at work negatively impacts their mental health and their stress levels. All you have to do is genuinely care and have grace for people who are genuinely trying, even when big things are on the line, it's okay to have two sets of eyes looking it over so that people have an opportunity to learn and make mistakes without the pressure of being the only one.
One of the things that I think is the most important in all the allied professions, and Amanda spoke about, perfectionism and doing the documents right, getting the tax planning, getting the investment planning right, and so on. But I think one of the most important ingredients, and this is going to be even more and more important as AI plays a bigger role, is creativity. It's seeing something different. It's finding a creative solution. Because in all the allied professions, it's not just numbers that we're dealing with. It's not just legal terminology, but it's rather taking the knowledge base that we have, whether it's tax law, finance, whatever, and creatively melding that with the unique human circumstances of each client. And there's no client that comes in that has the identical wishes, goals, personal feelings, fears that any other client does. And that's, I think, where the focus is going to shift as AI becomes more powerful, because things that are routine will be less involved with, but the creativity aspect is going to be more and more important. It's what's going to differentiate us from Copilot or Chat GPT, et cetera. But when you're that stressed or sleep deprived, you can't be creative. I think you could probably do a decent job just by you used a word before, wasn't grunting, was it grunting your way through it, or just grit?
Grit.
You can go pretty far with grit, but I think creativity is the first thing that starts to get jeopardized or impacted negatively with stress and sleep deprivation. But that's the future of the contribution we have to add. So the statistics on this page show how valuable it can be to deal with these mental health and emotional issues, psychological safety. But I think it even understates what it's moving towards for all of the allied professions.
Here's the thing for me that really made me reflect. With the numbers of people who are literally dying from depression, anxiety, this combination of maybe previous mental health disorders or just mental health disorders that emerge as a result of the stress of the culture and expectations, 6 out of 10 attorneys said that in the last 6 months, that's just 6 months, they at least sometimes came across other legal professionals whose work responsibilities were affected by well-being, substance abuse, or mental health issues. And so few, if any, likely reported it. I don't know with the number out there where the other 4 are, if they're living under a rock or if they're the ones struggling and just don't notice anyone else. But I think that it's really relevant that those 6 who are noticing feel the courage and have the safety to be able to say something. And what I've learned from different lawyers and different financial professionals is they're not quite sure what to say. And they don't want somebody's legal judgment being questioned or financial judgment being questioned. They're concerned about the ramifications for their career or the person who's struggling career. And so they feel like they're caught in a double bind. And the question that I really posed is, at what point do we decide that we're no longer willing to exchange lives for liabilities? And I don't know what that answer is, but I think that that's a question we all have to ask ourselves.
Amanda, I just had a thought, maybe off base, but let me just talk to you about it and you can comment. And if it's off base, you can just dismiss me and we'll go on. It's not just death by suicide that is the statistic to look at, because someone may say, oh, the number of deaths relative to the number of professionals is still minuscule. But if somebody is under, think of the zebra analogy, somebody is acting like the lions at their heels all the time, the toll on their cardiovascular health, the toll on their family, or however they define loved ones, the toll on their well-being. If you have a satisfaction, I don't know if maybe someone's got a satisfaction meter, How many utils? That was a word I learned in the Wharton School for units of utility that they made up of pleasure. How many utils of happiness do you have over a lifetime? There's so many other measures than just death by suicide to quantify or consider or evaluate the impact of these problems. So even if you're working in a huge firm with thousands and thousands of professionals and you've never experienced death by suicide in the firm footprint, that doesn't mean all is well. How many years of life are people losing because of the stress in the environment? How many utils of happiness are being lost? I mean, the toll of this is very significant. And again, as AI becomes more powerful, creativity is what we have to do. We need to maximize the environment to foster that. I'm going to let you handle this one.
Change is hard for so many reasons. I think just like we talked about, no one who sees themselves as a fixer wants to appear to be the burden or the weak one. And because sometimes it is grit or the sacrifice of yourself that really sets the bar for those who are promoted. You're in a constant battle of when do I choose myself and when do I choose the promotion? And I think that the line for that varies from person to person. But when you see everybody else sacrificing themselves, there's a social pressure to do the same thing. And the other thing is, just like I told you, some of the advisors that came up to me and said, I never knew these were red flags. I just thought this is how we all had to live until the end of my career. And the normalization of abnormal things creates a lot of confusion. And people don't know that they're not okay. And if they feel like they're not, they're pretending they are so that they could stay within the culture and fit in, or, just not stick out at a very minimum. And they also have a fear that leadership will prioritize their profits over their well-being. And so there's a fear that if I step forward, then my career is on the line.
Nobody wants to feel less than adequate. Nobody wants their colleagues to know that they have a challenge. But the reality is we all have, I'll use a polite term, I don't want to offend Amanda, we all have stuff going on. And if you don't have stuff going on today, next year or the year after, we all will. It's inevitable. And the culture that Amanda's talking about, some of the, and I won't give any details, but some of the groups that I talked to about this program and the companion program were uncomfortable being involved with it because it's topics that don't want to get discussed. DEI programs are done with great frequency. The mental health aspect of it, it's certainly part of a diversity and inclusion discussion, but are we really including those people with mental health challenges? Are we really talking about it? Are we really dealing with it? If we want real inclusivity, these colleagues of ours that are struggling, and I'm not even talking about the clients and learning more about this to help clients that have issues and heirs and beneficiaries and so on that do. But are we really living and fostering an environment of inclusivity if we're making those that have these common challenges feel left out?
What I've learned, we've done webinars before where we've talked about this, but being up on a stage and presenting in a group that had the ability to talk to me afterwards, I learned, and I was a little bit nervous about how it would be received with the pictures up, with the story told, with the video shown. I was very nervous and thought it was a risky thing. But what I learned is how desperate people are to be able to share that they're going through something similar. And there were people who literally had tears in their eyes. There were people who were waiting to tell me their story. There were people who recognized themselves in the statistics. And if we don't start talking about this more, then more people are going to be sacrificed who don't have to be. But what I learned is that people are desperate to talk about it, and everybody feels like it's a risky thing, even though it's a highly desired thing.
I think, Amanda, that the response that you got was you were in person. It wasn't on like a web meeting where somebody was afraid of being recorded. You were safe to talk to because of your personality. You're kind, compassionate, and sweet. I'm a lawyer, right? But how many people feel the safety in speaking to somebody like the people in the audience felt speaking to you? And I think that's really what we have to strive for, is whether it's all of us as colleagues, somebody picked out in a firm, we got to find ways that people can be made to feel safe talking about the issues, because we can't help if we don't know. But I think the response you got is really important. You
I
want to
agree.
comment on this? Because I think the video is coming up, which we'll play.
Yeah, so this is something that we talked about in the beginning when we saw the stories of the young men who were working at these major institutions who ended up jumping from their buildings or dying by suicide. And what this guy, Kevin Roos, I don't know if that's how you pronounce his last name, but what he's saying is that you can't stand out in a field where there's no original thinking. So the only thing you could do is just sheer grit. And he uses the word sheer endurance, but that they're doing it to themselves because that's the only way they know to progress, and it's the thing that's consistently rewarded. So looking at this, 4,000 lawyers are surveyed. This is 2024. This was just last year. So you can see how afraid people are. 28% believe that talking openly about mental health to their supervisors could harm their chance of progress. Think about, Marty, if you worked for a firm and you said, man, I think I'm really struggling with my mental health. Who wants to give the depressed lawyer the next case? And so this is
No,
what
nobody
people are
does,
thinking
because
about.
my first worry as a colleague would be, geez, if this individual is struggling and they make a mistake, is that going to result in a malpractice claim against the firm? Are they going to harm the firm's reputation because of what they're doing?
Yeah.
And think about it. We're years and years into DEI, and yet this critical, vitally important component of diversity, inclusion, almost a third of people think they can't talk about it at all.
Yeah. And if I talk about it,
Something's missing, folks.
yeah. And the fear, if I talk about it, will it be spread around or will it be confidential? And you can see how many people are worried about the confidentiality, even if they do share. So that's another barrier that prevents them from sharing. And I think this really goes back to the numbers resulting from the impact of psychological safety. You need to be able to help people feel reassured in an extra way that they can share and that is confidential, and provide the resources, because it's your actions that will send the real message, not your words.
And look at the outpouring you got because of your personality and that it was in person, so people weren't afraid of somebody in their firm knowing. That was an outpour of emotions, feelings, and divulging really deeply personal stuff because people are looking for the outlet, a safe outlet.
Yep.
So where do we go from here? I think that merely listening to programs like what Amanda's presenting here and trying to talk openly about these issues, being sensitive to them, looking for the flags that have been talked about, and I hadn't thought of it until we had the conversation, but especially the flag of somebody too perfect, right? That is a huge first step. That doesn't cost anything or take much other than sort of a change in perspective. Amanda, what else can people do?
I think that you can incentivize things like going to the gym and doing that kind of thing, paying for those things, having EAPs. That's all great. But
What's
you
an
also,
EAP?
employee assistance program.
Okay.
But you can't punish them for utilizing it. So for instance, it can't be, I still expect you to work 1,000,000 hours and here's this gym
Only a
membership.
million.
Yeah,
Only a million.
but aren't you glad we're paying for the gym?
It's to use a trite phrase, but you have to walk the walk, not just talk the talk. So if you let employees, staff, associates, partners, managers, whatever, have, you know, X free days a month, a year, a quarter where they can just take a day because they really need it, but you're still holding a fire underneath them for the same number of billable hours or generated, you know, dollars in new business or AUM, have you really given them some flexibility to decompress or do whatever it is that they need to do? Um, you can comment quickly on this, and then we should get to the video and wrap up.
Yeah, so this was your idea from the last time we did this presentation, which I thought was really interesting. And you talked about how when people's lives are on the line, there are other industries where they step in and have strict regulations on work hours. And you talked about airline pilots, train operators, other things like that. And you said with lawyers and financial professionals' lives are also on the line, and we need to look at some of those other models to mirror what they're doing in those industries, which I was like, that is a fascinating idea.
But it's not just the hours in the office, it's what's really happening. So I'll tell us, I shouldn't, but I will. So we were on vacation in the Caribbean somewhere, doesn't matter where, and I was sitting at the beach, beautiful sunny day, gorgeous ocean, and my wife came over and was, you know, saying how proud she was that I was just chilling out, sitting at the beach, until she noticed that I had my laptop underneath the beach towel. That doesn't do it, right? You have to really actually do it. So, you know, whether the models from other industries can in some way be uh, managed, changed, morphed, adapted by law, accounting, wealth management, I don't know. But the statistics that Amanda's presented in lots of different perspectives and approaches throughout this program show that we got a problem, and not dealing with it is not a good thing. These are some of the things, and Amanda, I think we can kind of cut to the chase. They're here that some firms have tried, but the real question is this enough? And I think of the example of me sitting on the beach. Yes, I was at the beach, but no, I wasn't relaxing. These are some of the things that are talked about. Build a culture of appreciation. Talk about well-being. We got to do that. Small firms aren't going to have a burnout prevention team and programming, but big firms can do that. Smaller firms can participate in programs that, you know, local bar and accounting and financial planning organizations do. We need more of these topics. The reality is, I know that if I do a complex current tax topic on, you know, dynastic trust planning under the current environment or something with, you know, other tax people, we'll get thousands of people on a webinar. You don't get the same participation on a program like this because it's not valued. But this may be far more important because you're never going to get to the other planning and implement it if you don't understand what your personal or your colleague or partner or associate situation is. So I think that's a change in perspective that we all as allied professionals and our industries and our firms all need to try to look at. Reducing the number of meetings, adding more structure to them. One of my favorite meeting stories, I went to a client's office and he was giving me a tour of the office and he showed me the conference room. There was no chairs, just a table. And I kind of looked at him and said, why don't you have chairs? Where do people sit? He smiled. He said, if anyone wants a meeting and it's going to go on so long that you need to sit down, the meeting's done. Think about
I
it,
love that.
right? There's similar tools, but I think, you'll have the PowerPoint to look at. But I think we need to rethink what we're doing. I think we need to rethink what we're doing. And even small changes, like Amanda said, and we've given a lot of ideas, they don't have to cost a lot, they don't have to take a lot, but changing the environment. Look at the difference, the outpouring of feelings and comments that Amanda received when she spoke in person at a conference. We have to make our colleagues feel safe talking to other colleagues or somebody designated if it's a bigger firm, and sharing their issues.
I think also, if you go back and look at that first one, it's recentering your definition of success, not around AUM, not around billable hours, but around other things too, like the impact on your clients' lives or businesses and your own quality of life. You have to broaden what success means in order to feel good about it.
Most firms basically evaluate billable hours for lawyers and business origination. There's nothing factored in beyond that. Why? Even if you took, making up a number, 10% of profits and allocated those for contributions to the firm generally, contributing to the well-being of colleagues, charitable endeavors, contributing to the profession, just something to show some small acknowledgement for things other than billable hours and origination, that could lead to some change. At least there's an acknowledgement of it. But I haven't seen that happen.
I was just thinking how cool it would be if every firm,
I
both
love your
like, you know,
vocabulary. I can't use words like cool and etc. Go on.
I mean, what if each firm highlighted a case that they worked on or a client they worked with and the beneficial outcome that was created because of their work? I mean, that's tied to purpose, right? And I think we all want to see the impact our lives have, and that is fulfilling.
So I'm gonna, bear with me everybody for one quick second. Why is this not working? There you go. Here's the video clip. Amanda, before it starts, why don't you just tell everyone what it is?
Yeah, so you also have to back up the 19 seconds, but this is Tabitha, who I had spoken to when I was deep diving about Ken and learning about his life and the circumstances surrounding his decline and ultimate suicide. And so when I talked to Tabitha, she said that this this situation with Ken led her to really being more invested in lawyer mental health and well-being. And so I asked her if she'd be willing to make a video for me to show at the presentation. And this is the video that she created.
So just so everyone's clear, she was the a partner in the firm of Ken, who died by suicide, another lawyer.
There can never be enough outreach and support in our profession, as many good lawyers struggle with the demands of their profession and their lives. In the past decade, law firm culture began evolving, but challenges persist for practitioners seeking balance in their lives. This yearning for balance is a challenge for all lawyers, regardless of their setting, and for all professionals. In my observation, the largest challenge for lawyers has been the belief that more is better. More clients is more money, more billable hours is a partnership, more employees means more people to accomplish work. However, I've learned personally, for me, more is not necessarily better. More just leads to more stress, more aggravation, and more expenses. I advise people to strive to be better. Better clients, better working relationships, and a better firm culture. I often say do your best for as long as you can, and if you can't, take a break until you can do your best again. Everyone has something they wish were different about their lives or that they needed more of, but striving to attain it, the unattainable, is unhealthy and leads to burnout. Over the years, I've developed a list of do's and don'ts I've given these in many lectures to many attorneys over the years. The first one is, do look out for your colleagues and friends. Don't be afraid to approach people who you know are struggling and ask them how they are. Remember that events are temporary. Nothing lasts forever. Appreciate the small things in your everyday life. Find one thing that is good in every day. Let go of stressful events and people. If where you work isn't a good fit, then change and find something else. Don't react immediately to stressful situations. Not all events require an immediate response. Sometimes it's better to wait until tomorrow. When you feel yourself getting upset, pause and take 3 deep breaths. I often get up from my desk and walk around a little bit before responding to emails. Seek out others for support and camaraderie. Some of the best people I know are lawyers, but they don't have to be lawyers. They can be from another profession. Finally, I would like to close with two thoughts. Number 1, put yourself first. You're of little use to your family, your clients, or your business if you're not performing optimally. Self-care is not selfish. You don't have to work off a checklist. Find what works for you. And finally, my favorite quote: success is not final. Failure is not fatal. It is the courage to continue that counts. By Winston Churchill. Thank you for your time.
Amanda, why don't you, I think we should end with that. Why don't you just make some concluding comments? That's very powerful.
It was very powerful. And, my big hope is that people see themselves in the characters of Ken's life and remember that he is a real person, just like you, just like the people at your firm, and that there are 3 people that are watching this at the moment. There's Ken, there's Tabitha, and there's Betsy. And each one of those people has the power to change the trajectory of what happens next. And I hope that if you are struggling, you reach out to all the different advisor mental health groups or hotlines. You can email me and I'll help connect you to something or someone. If you're not sure how to start a conversation with someone who's struggling, I'm happy to help you do that. But what I want you to know is that you are a powerful person who has the power to change trajectories of a future, a family, and different people in your lives, including you.
I want to thank Amanda for what I think is a really important program. All the credit goes to her. I was kind of along for the ride. Join us next week for the second part of this, which is really an incredibly powerful discussion by Betsy, Ken's widow, of the story of what they went through. And she's an incredibly brave, strong human being to be able to even speak about this stuff. And I think she did it because she wants to make a positive impact on others that are struggling. And Amanda has always said that putting a face in a real situation is so much more powerful than a statistic. So please join us, because I think that'll really drive home all the points and really how important addressing this is. So thank you, Amanda. Thank you for joining us, and I hope that rather than upsetting any of you, that this discussion motivates many, if not all of you, to take action. Thank you for joining us.